What is the objective of backgammon? Backgammon is a race game with checkers and dice for two players. Each player starts with 15 checkers of their color, two dice, a dice cup, and a special cube used to raise the stakes, the doubling cube. Players move their checkers across the board according to dice rolls. To win the game, a player must first bring all their checkers into their home board, then bear them off the board. A player's home is called a board, or inner board. In backgammon, checkers are commonly referred to as men. It is therefore a race game along a track. How to set up a backgammon board. Here is the board from the mirrored perspective of both players in the starting position. How to set up a backgammon board. How to set up a backgammon board. It has 24 triangles called interchangeably points or spaces. 6 adjacent points form a board. The 4 boards have specific names: white's inner board, white's outer board, black's outer board, black's inner board. The separation between inner and outer boards is marked by the bar, which plays an active role in the game of backgammon. On Backgammon Circle, the default position is the first one, so your inner board is at the bottom right. You can change this in the settings. Since a good backgammon player should be comfortable playing in both directions, we even offer the option to automatically switch sides after each game. How to start a backgammon game. To begin, both players simultaneously roll a single die each on a different half of the board. The player with the higher die plays first, combining their own roll with their opponent's die. Ties are re-rolled. For all subsequent moves in the game, players alternate rolling 2 dice. How do you move checkers in backgammon? The board can be visualized as a U-shaped track. A checker, or man, regardless of its position on the board, moves along this U-shaped track, always forward. The movement of checkers is illustrated in the image below. How do you move checkers in backgammon? The black checkers advance from white's inner board, cross the bar, pass through white's outer board, round the hinge, the U, enter black's outer board, and finish their race in black's inner board. In other words, black advances from point 1 toward point 24 and vice versa. The bar is not a space in itself. Crossing it costs no movement points. The roll of 2 dice determines the number of spaces checkers can move forward. The respective values of the dice are not added together and are treated as independent moves, although they may be combined on the same checker. For example, a roll of 2 and 4 does not represent a move of 6 spaces, but rather a move of 2 spaces and a move of 4 spaces. There are 3 ways to play this roll. Move 1 checker 2 spaces, then another checker 4 spaces. Move the same checker 2 spaces, then 4 spaces. Move the same checker 4 spaces, then 2 spaces. For a roll of 5-3, for example, here is a possible move applying both moves to the same man. How do you move checkers in backgammon? When doubles are rolled, 1-1, 2-2, 3-3, 4-4, 5-5, 6-6, each die counts for 2 moves. There will therefore be 4 moves. A roll of 6-6, for example, allows 4 moves of 6 spaces, which can be distributed as follows. Move 1 checker 6 spaces 4 times. Move 1 checker 6 spaces 3 times and another checker 6 spaces once. Move 1 checker 6 spaces twice and another checker 6 spaces twice. Move 1 checker 6 spaces once and another checker 6 spaces 3 times. Move 4 different checkers 6 spaces each. What are the legal moves in backgammon? A checker may land on any empty space. It may also land on a space occupied by one or more of its own checkers. There is no limit to the number of same-colored checkers stacked on a space. Finally, a checker may land on a space occupied by one and only one opponent checker. A move cannot end on a space occupied by at least 2 opponent checkers. It is even impossible to stop in passing on such a space when combining the values of 2 dice. However, it is possible to pass directly over a space occupied by several opponent checkers. For example, in the following situation, if the black player rolls 5-4, they can neither advance their back checkers by 4 or 5, nor move them directly by 9, even though the corresponding space is available. What are the legal moves in backgammon? It is forbidden to pass your turn as long as a move is possible. Both dice must be played if legal moves exist. Furthermore, if there is at least one way to play both dice, it is forbidden to play one die in such a way that no legal move remains for the other die. If it is not possible to make both moves, the higher die must be prioritized when possible. Unplayed dice are forfeited. How does hitting and entering work? Two or more checkers occupying a point control that point. A single checker on a point is called a blot. When a move lands on an opponent's blot, that checker is hit and placed on the bar. The hit checker is temporarily out of play. However, hitting is never mandatory. A player with one or more checkers on the bar must re-enter them before making any other move on the board. Re-entering is done in the opponent's home board. To do so, you use a die whose value lands on an open point in the opponent's home board. If black has a 1 among the two dice, they can re-enter on the first point of white's home board, provided that point is empty, occupied by black's own checkers, or occupied by a single opponent checker. How does hitting and entering work? The value needed to re-enter on an open point must come from at least one of the two dice. Combining the values of both dice to re-enter is not allowed. Points occupied by two or more checkers, necessarily of the same color, form block points on which opponent checkers cannot land. With a checker on the bar, if both dice land on blocked points, re-entering is impossible for that turn. The player passes and must wait for the next turn to try again. Since they cannot move any checkers already on the board until they have re-entered, their opponent immediately takes control. When a home board has a blocked point on each of its 6 points, it is said to be closed. An opponent with a checker on the bar cannot play until at least one point is opened up. How to bear off in backgammon. The intermediate goal of a backgammon game, bring all your checkers into your home board. This is the bear-in phase. You can then start bearing them off, known as the bear-off phase. Once a checker is borne off, it stays off for the rest of the game. If one of your checkers is hit after you've started bearing off, you cannot bear off any more checkers until the hit checker re-enters and travels all the way back to your home board. The first player to bear off all 15 checkers wins the game. Bearing off means moving a checker beyond point 1 of your home board. For example, if white rolls 6-4 when all points in their home board contain at least 2 checkers, they must use the 6 to bear off a checker from point 6. The 4 can be used to bear off from point 4, but it can also be used to move a checker 4 points forward, from point 5 or 6 to point 1 or 2 respectively. How to bear off in backgammon. If a die shows a value strictly higher than the highest occupied point, you must bear off a checker from the highest occupied point. Whenever possible, a die must be played to its full value. How does the doubling cube and scoring work? The initial stake of a game is 1 point. This point is won by the first player to bear off all their checkers, but the stake can increase during the game. It is represented by the face value of the doubling cube, numbered 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64. At the start of a game, the doubling cube is placed between both players, showing the face value 64. There is no one on the cube. The value 64 represents the default initial stake of 1 point at the beginning of a game. A player can propose to double the game stake, especially if they feel they have gained a significant advantage. To do so, they offer the cube on the 2 face to their opponent, and this must be done before rolling the dice. Note, a player who is blocked from moving can still propose to double. When offered a double, a player can take one of 2 approaches: pass, refuse the double, immediately conceding the game to the opponent for 1 point. Accept the double, take. They physically take possession of the cube and continue the game with doubled stakes. By accepting the cube, the player becomes its owner, only they now have the right to redouble. The game's stake can be doubled and redoubled multiple times, subject to the following restrictions. At the start, the cube is in the center and either player can double. Subsequently, only the player who owns the cube can double. A player can double just before their dice roll. If the double is accepted by the opponent, the player rolls and makes their moves. Otherwise, they immediately win the stake at the cube value before the double proposal and the game ends. The winner of the game scores the number of points shown on the cube, except in the case of a gammon or backgammon. Gammon. A gammon occurs when a player has borne off all their checkers while their opponent has not borne off any. The gammon winner scores double the face value of the cube. Backgammon. A backgammon is an extension of the gammon in which the player who has not started bearing off still has at least one checker in the opponent's home board. The winner then scores triple the face value of the cube. Note, in some countries, a backgammon is worth only double rather than triple. Backgammon is generally played as a match to X points, with the first player to reach or exceed the set number of points winning the match. A backgammon match always uses an odd number of points, typically 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, or 13. Important match play rule. The Crawford rule states that if one player reaches a score of exactly 1 point less than the match target, the doubling cube is removed from play for the following game. Doubling is not allowed. This applies for one game only. If the match continues, the cube returns.